Hello, and welcome to my video on quantitative sampling methods. So, quantitative sampling. Remember, quantitative studies, we usually use the example of a questionnaire. You create a questionnaire, you send it out to a large number of people. So sample sizes with quantitative studies is usually quite large. They fill in the questionnaire, it comes back, and you analyze the data using usually Microsoft Excel. But how do you pick your sample? So let's say, well, in another video called Introduction to Sampling, the example I had there is, what if the population was all the fourth year educational students at the University of Pretoria, and you wanted to conduct a study on how they felt about online learning during COVID. So the question is, how would you pick which fourth year students to include in your sample? Because you will have a class list, but how do you pick? So the first one is called simple random sampling. So you can read all of this. I'm not going to read all these different slides. In many of my videos, I do mention I don't believe reading slides is teaching. I prefer that you read the slides, obviously in advance to watching the video. So I'm not reading all this. Let me give examples. Let's start with simple random sampling. So simple random sampling, this would be, for example, where you write down all the names of the fourth year students on little pieces of paper, and you make a lot of these. You know, there's 1,000+ students, you'll need 1,000+ little pieces of paper. You write the names of students or the student numbers on the piece of paper, you throw it in a hat, you close your eyes, and you pull a couple of names. That is the idea behind a simple random sampling. People like this approach because everyone has an equal chance to be selected. Okay. And because in real life, I mean, you wouldn't make thousands pieces of papers, put names on it, and throw it in a hat. What we would rather do, there's an Excel function, and it's a rand between. So let's say, let me see if I can open Excel and show that to you. Let me zoom in. So let's say there are 1,100 fourth year educational students. So what you would want to do is rand between. So you want to say pick randomly a number between 1 and 1,100. So then Excel tells you take name number 82 on the class list. And of course you just pull this down. And let's say you want a sample of size 10, so I'm rather going to pull it down to 10. If you just want a sample of size 10, it tells you take student in position number 212, student in position 1090. So it just tells you where on the class list to pick. So this is a random way, it's a random number generator by Microsoft Excel. So that is simple random sampling. The big advantage is everyone has an equal chance to be selected. There's another one, the systematic sampling. So what you would do for systematic sampling is they say you take every nth person on the list. So for the example, let's take every fifth person. So here you pick a number and you say, I'm going to use every fifth person on the list. So you start there, you pick the first student and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You pick that student. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You pick that student. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You pick that student. Okay, this is systematic sampling. Of course, the drawback is not everyone has an equal chance of being selected. You might, what I'm trying to say with that, let me first read this and I will explain. Okay, so we use the nth the person on the list. It provides a sample that is highly representative of the population. It requires a complete list of the population frame. Okay, so the only problem with this, if you think about the surnames, for Afrikaans surnames, you will have a lot of them starting with a V. Van Rensburg, Van Jaarsveld, you know. So you will have, because you're using every fifth student, you will have more V surnames than other surnames. So it's not completely a simple random sample. However, it is very highly representative of the population. Why do we say that? So if we look at the Afrikaans-speaking students, there's a lot of V surnames. In the population, that would also be true. There would be a lot of V surnames under that population group. And then for your sample, because you're taking every fifth student, you would also have a lot of V surnames. So you are sort of representing what is happening within the population. So it's a very good way of systematically sampling. Now we have two stratified sampling and cluster sampling. They are very similar. They both make groups. So with stratified sampling, we call the groups strata, and with cluster sampling, we call the groups clusters, but we are basically creating groups and then picking people from the groups. But what's the difference between the two? So in stratified sampling, each group is unique. Each group or strata, stratified strata, but strata just means group. So if one group is not represented, you've got a massive problem with your study. So let's look at my example. Let's say you want to conduct a study about the average number of hours that a learner studies. Now, in South Africa, we get urban areas, and I just put like the official definition that I got from a government document. So you can just read through it. I'm sure you know the differences. You have suburban and you have rural areas. So each of these groups are so unique that the government has definitions for them. And I think we all know the situation in each area is significantly, dramatically different. Where maybe in rural areas, a learner might study less, have less number of hours, because, you know, they don't have electricity. So when it's dark, they can't study. Whereas in an urban area, in a city, there's electricity. If it's not load shedding, I have to make that joke. No, but there's electricity, so they can study for longer hours into the evening. But you need all these three groups need to be in your study if you are trying to represent South Africa. So stratified sampling, every single group is important. Meaning if you drop a group, your study is worthless. See, now it's not representing South Africa. It's not representative of the population of South Africa. That's stratified sampling. What is cluster sampling? Cluster sampling is when one group is absent, it doesn't really matter. Think about this. If you want to do a study, again, on the average number that a learner studies daily, and you are looking at these areas, these are all close to the Faculty of Education. So you should be familiar with this. There's Groenkloof, there's Brooklyn, there's Waterkloof, Linwood, Garsfontein, and Menlo Park. So you want to go into these areas and get from each area a couple of learners. But with cluster sampling, you have your groups, But let's say you get 10 students from Groenkloof, 20 from Lucan, 30 from Waterkloof, 15 from Linwood, and let's say 20 from Gasfontein. And suddenly your funding for the project has run out. Let's say you don't have petrol money anymore, to drive to learners' homes to interview them. And you decide you're going to leave out Menlo Park. Then your study is still fine. It is still okay. Your study will survive without Menlo Park in it. So we're trying to say with clusters, if one of the groups sort of fall out of your study or withdraw from your study, or you can't get to the group because of funding that's run out, it is okay. Your study will survive. Um, I think of clusters. I always think of grapes, sort of, if one of these grapes are sort of picked, is gone, the study is still fine. The grapes, the bunch of grapes is still okay. Even if another grape is sort of removed, it's okay. Your study will still survive. So these groups are so very similar. But if one group is absent, your study still is viable. So I think the most difficult part today is seeing the difference between stratified sampling, where you have strata, which are groups. But remember, those groups are so unique. You need every single group in your study, or your study is not viable anymore. And you have cluster sampling, where the groups are called clusters. But if one of these clusters withdraw, it's fine. Just think of grapes. The bunch of grapes sort of will hold, will survive if one or two grapes are not there anymore. Thank you for watching the video on quantitative sampling methods.